Hello. So, okay, I'm good. So, for this video, I'll just address. So I'm filming on my computer instead of my phone. I'm not sure what's going on, but it's still mostly capturing wind, and I tested this, and the sound on this seems to work better. So, this is what we will go with until that gets sorted out. And hopefully this means videos will get out faster because then I do the editing on the computer, so then it'll just be right there and I don't have to do this all the same while uploading it to please. Anyways, so today I'm gonna try to do so. In the past I've done just recent reads, just kind of over a period of time, but now I'm gonna try to do this where it's like, okay, I read these in these months. So today we're covering books I read in September and October because I usually read a book a week, so there's not really enough to do a whole month. So we are going to be covering 9 books. So let's get started. So the first book I read was The Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis. So this is a very famous book of C.S. Lewis's, and the premise of this book is a collection of letters written by a senior demon named Screwtape to his nephew Wormwood, because Wormwood is not doing a good job tempting his patient, as they call them, to stay away from God. So Screwtape is writing these letters telling Wormwood how to tempt his patient. And the patient, I don't think I can say too much about him without giving stuff away. So this is fiction technically, but it doesn't read that way. It seems it kind of feels more like non-fiction. So because especially since I felt like after reading this, the feeling that I get from after finishing quite a few non-fiction books where it's like, I feel like I need to read this again. So this needs to be added to the rereading TBR. The next book, so the next book, this is, I guess you could say, a DNF. Although I don't like to say that because I always think with these books like, oh, I'll go back to it eventually, but this one, I'm not so sure. This next book, Eragon by Christopher Paolini. So again, I didn't finish the book, so what happens from my understanding is about our titular character Eragon, and he lives in this kind of he lives in this town with his uncle and cousin, and one day he finds what he thinks is a rock, and it's a very rare, interesting rock with like veins on it and stuff. So he doesn't know what this is, and he kind of asks around about it. But then one day he realizes that this is not a rock and is in fact a dragon egg. So one day, like the dragon hatches, and then he kind of has to keep this dragon a secret, and they like kind of bond, like I don't know, I don't know where to go from there. So, so this book is not bad. I think I was just kind of bored, and it's kind of unfortunate that whenever I DNF books, it's usually because I'm bored. So, yeah, not much else to say about that. So the next book I read was The Unhoneymooners by Christina Lauren. And I'm probably one of the few people who've read that book in September. Actually, kind of funny. I was actually planning on reading this book in late November, but I was too curious, so I read it in September. But so, as you can tell, I am definitely not a seasonal reader. So, this book is about Olive, and Olive's sister Amy is getting married, but Olive hates the best man, Ethan. So the wedding happens, but then on the night of the wedding, the whole wedding party gets food poisoning, except for Olive and Ethan. And so, the honeymoon that her sister and her husband were gonna go on, like she like won it, like it was like one of those things where like you win, and because of that they can't like postpone it or like do anything about. So Olive and Ethan have to go on this trip in their place, and they have to pretend to be them and pretend to be married. But then, of course, during their trip, they start to like actually fall for each other and like all those things. So, yes, like an enemies to lovers book. And I think I was going to mention this sooner, but like, am I the only bookish person that like doesn't really care for enemies to lovers? Like I don't mind it, but it's like not like the best trope ever, like to what everyone else seems to think it is. Like the only thing I've seen otherwise that's like kind of counter the net is that enemies to lovers doesn't make sense in a modern context, but even that is not. So yeah, this story, um, because this, I guess maybe the reason why I don't really care for it is that what I've been exposed to the past is like enemies to lovers not done as well, maybe. But even this, like, I was wanting them to be together, but I still am like, eh. So I ended up listening to like music while reading this book, like music with words, which I've done before, and yeah, it kind of works, and it usually I think helps me to get through more of the book, even if I'm not liking it that much. So I don't know if I actually enjoyed this book, but I think the thing that is kind of frustrating about it is that I was told that this was a closed door romance, and like maybe it is, but it was grosser than I expected it to be. And I don't even want to say some of the things. There's some parts where I was like, ugh. Yeah, no, I did not like that. But I did end up liking it more when they got back from the honeymoon. That is one thing I was told about, is that the story doesn't end with like them being on the honeymoon living happily ever after. They like, come back and then like deal with things in their own life. So I did like that part. So I gave it 3 stars. Um, I probably just knocked down because of, yeah, grosser than I expected. So the next thing is I started the On the Runway series by Melody Carlson. If you guys been paying attention, I've probably mentioned a few times that I read a lot of her books in high school. So the first book in the series is Premiere. So this is about two sisters, Paige and Erin. And so, trying to remember. So Paige had this, I guess, this moment on national TV. I don't think I was even paying that close attention when I read this scene, so I don't even remember what happened. But it was kind of talked about, and because of that, this producer ended up offering Paige and her sister Erin this new fashion TV show. But to get it off the ground, she invites them to be on this other um, this other teen TV show called Malibu Beach, which the show does not exist. I looked it up. So, but things get a little hairy and potentially put their show in jeopardy when Paige starts falling for one of the people on the show who's dating this other person on the show, and stuff happens from there. And before I move on to talking about this, I just gotta say, so while it seems from that synopsis that like Paige is the main character, the book is written from the perspective of her sister Erin. So it will. And this whole series, it seems like, but yeah, we'll get to that. So this book was just kind of fun, kind of had some of that nostalgia from the Melody Carlson books I read in high school. Although, what is different about these ones is that the other books that I've read from her, uh, most of them usually revolve around like teenagers, like high schoolers, Whereas in this series, the girls are like college age. So there's that. So I ended up giving it 2.75 stars, and that was only because I wasn't drawn in. If you don't draw me in, you're not gonna get a high rate. So yeah, that book is like wasn't perfect, but like it was fun. But then I read the second book in this series called Catwalk, and I'm not gonna explain the synopsis of this one because again I might give away stuff from the first book. This book, so I have quite a few complaints. So so in the beginning there's this kind of like the stuff I'm saying here might give away some stuff. So they're talking to early on in this book this like lady who does like green fashion, and this lady, I did not like her. She just came off like, if you don't support this social cause, you're a horrible person. When in reality, sometimes things are more complicated than they're presented to be. So there's that. And like you might read that part and might not think she came off that way, but to me it was just kind of like, mm. So, and then partway through the book, they mentioned that they're going to meet Taylor Mitchell, and I was like, wait, Taylor? Are you talking about Taylor from Carter House Girls? This is so cool, and like all that stuff. So then, they talk about, oh, they're going to meet Taylor, and then they mentioned we're also going to meet Eliza, her roommate, and I was like, oh, okay. And then they mentioned going to see Brienne, and I'm like, Melanie, are you just trying to cram every Carter House girls? Well, no, not every. Are you just trying to cram as many of the Carter House girls as you can into this story? Ugh. And then, of course, then she also fits in DJ, and then it seems like the way Erin was like responding to these girls, it kind of felt very much like Melody making her like the characters she wants us to like. Like it didn't feel as genuine, and it felt forced, like this whole thing. So at that point I was like, okay, you're getting 2 stars. But then she includes my least favorite trope, which I don't think I can say what it is without giving spoilers. So then I was like, okay, 1.5 stars or less. But then at the end there was this tragedy. So then I was like, okay, fine, back to 2 stars. So yeah, no, did not like this. So also I have to ask a question kind of about the series. So it seems at this point in the series I'm like, is Blake Erin's main love interest? Because I've seen with like other Melanie Carlson books that like if a relationship lasts as long as Erin and Blake's, then that means this is going to be the main romance. But I don't know, it just seemed like from the first book it just kind of seemed like that wasn't going to be the case based on how it was set up. And I would be fine with this if it wasn't set up in that way. And if, yeah, I can't really talk about this. So, it says here in my notes when I wrote this that I wasn't sure if I'm going to read the rest of the series because I guess at the time I was curious about what would happen next. But nah, eventually I'm like, no, I don't have time for the rest of this. There's too many books I want to get to bother with this. So the next book I have a little those video entries that are like initial thoughts. So I'll play that right now. Today I plan to start reading If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. I've actually heard not so good things about it, but that for some reason makes me want to read it even more. Well, not even more, because I wasn't at all interested before, but... So, I'm actually looking... Well, maybe not as much now, but I was looking forward to it. I don't know if I'm gonna like it. I know at the very least I'm gonna be annoyed by them quoting Shakespeare every 5 seconds, so...
see.
So this book is about 7 students at this like art school in I can't remember where. Um I was originally gonna say all their names, but I'm not gonna bother now. But the main character, whose what perspective we're getting this from, is Oliver. So, so they have all these 7 students, and they're Shakespearean students. So, yeah, they're all Shakespeare students. So they're always performing plays and like studying stuff and stuff. But in their 4th year, one of them ends up being murdered, and it probably is a spoiler to say which one it is, although I didn't even mention their name. So, because it happens partway through the book and they don't mention who it was until then. So yeah, and and so then they're trying to like they're trying to spin their own story to like keep one of them from being implicated, but it doesn't go as they planned. So, this book actually, so as I mentioned in that first clip, I had heard not so good things about it, and actually after I filmed that, I was kind of second guessing my choice to read this because I was like, oh no, am I gonna regret this? But I kind of liked this. Yeah, I know it's. So first of all, I mentioned, oh, I'm probably going to be annoyed that they're going to be quoting Shakespeare every 5 seconds, but um, they did not do that, and even like they're saying, like, oh, they quote Shakespeare like even in a normal conversation, but like I would say like a good amount of the Shakespeare quotes was when they were like rehearsing and like practicing lines of performing and stuff. There was only like I'd say it was only like maybe like a third of the time that when they were quoting it, it was in like normal conversations. Like maybe it is much for some people, but I thought it was gonna be like every 5 seconds, and it was not. So, and also another thing I was told was like, "Oh, there's no way you wouldn't guess who did it. It's so obvious." And I'm like sitting there reading this, and then the killer's revealed, and I'm just like, "Am I just an idiot?" Because I did not guess who did it. So yeah, so it's fine for me. But the thing now come to the thing that is most talked about with this book, which is the romances. And apparently to talk about it is not spoilers. So and this is where I might upset some people. So but kind of the romance is that there's kind of he has feelings for this guy, but then also he kind of starts a relationship with this woman. And yeah, there's. I wouldn't say because I was also told this was like just Oliver struggling with his sexuality, but I wouldn't necessarily agree with that. I would say it's more just about their life. I didn't really see a lot of the struggle between those two, but it's just kind of there's both of these people that he's eyeing. So with the guy, I know a lot of people um love this relationship with the guy, and for obvious reasons because of all the stuff going on in culture. But and even like some of the negative reviews were saying, "Oh, I wish there was more between them." I personally thought the stuff with the guy was kind of forced. Yeah, I wasn't like when the guy just shows up to his house, I was kind of like, okay, this is getting a little ridiculous. I mean, the relationship felt a little bit more real towards the end, but than that. And with the woman, I kind of felt like with the woman, like they were trying, like the way they started their relationship is like they were trying to make us not root for her and Oliver. But then later on, like as they get more established, and then I think the one part that got me was when he was like, "Well, why me out of all the other guys?" And she was like, "Everyone else treats me like a whore, and you don't." And that was kind of like, oh, yeah. And then there's all that. And then kind of related but kind of not is that this book's categorized as like dark academia. And I'm just kind of wondering based on the stuff that I've heard, like what kind of book, what does a book have to be considered dark academia? Because I heard of this book like, oh, I wouldn't consider this dark academia because there aren't a lot of dark academia vibes. But then I've heard of books that do kind of have more of that vibe. It's like, no, that's just co-opting the aesthetics of dark academia. But that's not real dark academia. And apparently Bunny is considered dark academia. So I'm just confused. Like, what does dark academia actually mean? So, star rating. I'm not sure what star rating to give this. I did enjoy it, but like, I wonder if it's just kind of like I feel like I shouldn't rate this book as to how much I enjoyed it, considering how there are a lot of people who don't like it, but like, that's probably stupid. So, but anyways, I don't know. The next book I read was Darling Girls by Sally Hepworth. So this book is about three women, Jessica, Nora, with an H, very important that you remember the H, and Alicia. And these girls all um, they went into foster care when they were kids, and they all ended up at this same house, owned by this woman named Miss Fairchild. And they were told that this is, oh, you're so lucky to be here. And then, but then they realize, well, this place is just, it's not ideal for them to be. This Fairchild is not a good caretaker. So, but then years later, after they've gone out of this and they've all grown up, they're all adults now, they're doing the house that they lived in is has been torn down because they want to build like a McDonald's there or something. But they found a skeleton of a young child there, and so they're bringing these girls back in as a part of their investigation to find out like who this child was and like when was this and like all that stuff. So they kind of have to face their past and like all these things. So yeah, I probably didn't even explain it that well, but yeah. So I was very drawn into this and ended up finishing this book in 3 days. It was kind of funny, like so like well not funny. So I think the first day I read like I think like 60 pages or something, and then the second day I read even more, and then the third day I finished the book. So and I wasn't sure if that was gonna happen because this book is like over 400 pages. So yeah, and also it's been a while since I filmed. So, also, this is like the second book I've read this year where I realized partway through the book that this book takes place in a place other than North America. Like, the first book that this happened with was Good Bad Girl by Alice Feeney. I realized partway through that that book takes place in, I think, London or some major city in the UK, so like in Europe. And this book takes place in Australia. So yeah, it's very hard with both of those books. Like I'm one of those people that is like a hard time differentiating between like a British accent and an Australian accent. So it's very hard for me to imagine what these people were supposed to sound like. And I definitely did not imagine that well. I think another thing I wanted to mention was a particularly heartbreaking scene where I think it's Alicia has just shown up to the house. So this book kind of takes place, it takes place in the present time, but then there's also they go back in time to their times at that house. And so Alicia had just shown up and she's like very upset with this stuff. And then Nora, who's like also mentioned, so Jessica and Alicia, when they both came to this house, it was their first time being in childcare, whereas Nora had been in and out of different foster homes. So she she came here, and so Alicia's sad that this is like her first time, and she's been in a foster home, but I'm not explaining this well. And so she's like very shocked by this, and Nora's saying like, "Oh, it could be worse," and she listing off like all these different things that I guess that like have happened to her at different foster homes. And so what's kind of sad about this is that she's explaining these things in a way she understands it as like an 11-year-old girl, but like as an adult when you're reading this, like you know exactly what these things are, and it's like sad and heartbreaking because like no kid should ever have to experience that. It's yeah. So there's something that's kind of revealed towards the end that at first I was like kind of skeptical about, like how that was done, but then I thought about it more, and then I was like, okay, I guess that works, and I can't really talk about it without giving spoilers. Now, I guess I always got to bring up what other people say about this book. So I went on Goodreads after reading this book, and I saw 2 reviews of it from 2 very prominent books, booktube people, whom I will not name. But the things that they said about this book is that it's not a mystery thriller, that it's like advertised as a mystery thriller, but it's not, but they were still drawn in, but like it's not thrilling, or like all these things. And so my response to that is like, I don't like I've seen this kind of critique before about things where it's like if a story doesn't fit into like a specific genre, that automatically makes the story bad, is how it seems. And I'm just not convinced by that. Like, well, I guess you could say, like, oh, the marketing wasn't right. Like, the marketing was deceptive. But even with that, so, like, that's a problem with the marketing, not with the book itself. And I did really like this book. Um, and I probably wouldn't have read it if I didn't know it was a thriller. So, I guess I don't know what to do there, but I did like this. Yeah, there's stuff I'm forgetting to say, but I don't know if I'm gonna say it. More obscure books. So, the next book is Paper Moon by Linda Windsor. So, originally, I was going to read the whole series in a short amount of time so I could talk about all of them in this video. But I started this book, and so the plan with that was to read like 10 chapters a day. And during this time reading this book, I didn't even get to the 10th chapter. This was so bad. I don't even know how to explain it. I think the thing that mainly bothered me was that it's written in third person, but kind of with different perspectives, like we're following different characters. And there seems to be, and it's not clear of when you're switching to each character. And there's sometimes where it's like in a section, it'll switch to following another character, which I believe is called an unintentional perspective switch, which is not good writing. So, and that just made it confusing to follow and stuff. And then they just randomly bring in another perspective. It's like, we didn't sign up for this, ma'am. So, yeah. Safe to say, I probably will never, this is probably is a DNF, and I'm probably never gonna go back to it, let alone read the other books in the series. Okay, so this last book, I actually finished it in November, but since this is finished, I might as well talk about this, but because I started this in October. So, The last book I read was Payback by Gordon Korman. So this is the third book in the Mastermind trilogy. And because it's the third book in the series, I will not be going over the synopsis so that it doesn't spoil stuff from the first and second book. So, yeah, so it's probably hard to talk about, but like, if you want to know what this book series is about, you can look it up. So I gave this 3.5 stars. That's because, like, sometimes I was drawn in and sometimes I was not. It was weird because usually when there's like action and stuff, I'm usually like drawn in because I like want to know how people are gonna if people are gonna be okay and stuff. But for some reason with the action parts, I wasn't as drawn in. Maybe that's because I couldn't tell what's happening because it's hard for me to picture what's being described. So yeah, I don't have much else to say. Oh, I forgot to mention. So so the first two books in the series, my teacher actually read them to us when I was in grade 7. So we read the first book, we read the second book, and we started the third book, but we did not finish it. So, but all these years later, I want to know what happens. So I read this third book. I'll probably have to edit around to make that. So yeah, that is all. Like, subscribe, all the things. See you later. Goodbye.